Welcome to the Great Basin Smoke Dispersion Briefing for Monday, November 4th. Over the last 2 weeks, we've seen very dry conditions across the Great Basin. Only some areas of Idaho, Wyoming, into the mountains of northern Utah have seen precipitation, but this precipitation is well below normal for the time of year. Other southern and western areas of the Great Basin has been very dry for the last several weeks. Looking at new snowfall, no new snowfall recorded across the Great Basin, and the only snowpack we have is really up into Idaho, Wyoming, and northern Utah. This snowpack is near or just above normal for the time of year, as you can see the areas in green, with well below normal snowpack over the rest of the Great Basin. Looking at the Evaporative Demand Drought Index, you can see how these dry conditions have affected the Great Basin. We're still seeing some fairly dry conditions over the Arizona Strip, far southern Nevada, and southern Utah, but obviously no real drought concerns further north where we have had the cooler temperatures and at least some precipitation. But you can also see how extreme the drought is over into California and down further south into Arizona. Satellite image from this morning shows generally a trough pattern over the central areas of the United States with ridging off the west coast. This is what will keep the Great Basin warm and dry here over the next couple of weeks, for the most part, also with generally sunny skies. Looking at the weather pattern for later today, you can see again dry conditions, light northerly winds in the north with slope winds or light winds everywhere else across the Great Basin. So generally, dispersion will be fairly poor across most areas. You can see the transport winds, the image on the left, showing generally light to moderate winds. We are seeing maybe a slight uptick in winds in the higher elevations of Utah and also up into Wyoming, but most of these wind gusts will remain below 30 miles per hour. Mixing heights will remain in the low to moderate range. On Tuesday, very similar conditions. You can see another front dropping south into the northern plains and the northern Rockies, which may clip parts of central Idaho. Not really expecting any precipitation, just maybe a little bit more in the way of cloud cover. Otherwise, poor dispersion expected across the region, with generally light winds across all of the Great Basin. The only exception might be over parts of western Wyoming. Otherwise, generally low to moderate mixing heights will continue. Looking at Wednesday, very similar conditions, poor dispersion, generally light northerly flow. And you can see those winds in the transport winds, the image on the left, and also again, very similar mixing heights, low to moderate across the Great Basin. Looking at the forecast clearing index for Utah for the next few days, and you can generally see more moderate range clearing indices only over the higher terrain of central Utah, with very low clearing indices in the lower elevations of western and southeast Utah, with similar conditions continuing throughout the week. No precipitation really is forecast across the Great Basin. Again, the cold front that will clip the northern side of the basin will keep most of the precipitation into Montana and northern and eastern Wyoming. Going into the middle of the week on Thursday, you can still see ridge of high pressure building across the Great Basin, keeping conditions warm and dry. Temperatures will generally be near to just above normal for the next several days with dry conditions and generally poor dispersion. On Friday, that ridge just expands across the Great Basin with those warm and dry conditions continuing and poor dispersion with similar conditions on Saturday. However, we do have another cold front dropping south into the northern Rockies, again, which may clip Idaho and Wyoming, bringing more in the way of cloud cover and maybe a slight uptick in winds. So we might see a little better dispersion towards Saturday over the northern half of the Great Basin. Then on Sunday, that ridge re-amplifies along the west coast, keeping conditions warm and dry with just north to northwest flow behind that cold front. So you might see a little bit better dispersion again continuing on Sunday. Otherwise, no precipitation is expected across the Great Basin for the next week in most areas. Looking at the 8 to 14-day outlook, taking us from November 11th through the 17th, still looking at warm and dry conditions across the Great Basin. We might start to see some cold fronts bringing some precipitation towards the third week in November. So right now we'll continue to watch that. We're not seeing anything real extreme with precipitation, but at least it might be a little bit of moisture. Otherwise, fairly dry and warm conditions. That concludes our webcast for today. Check back on Wednesday for the latest updates.